Okay, hello everybody. Good morning. Okay, just a quick story about my mom before we start. So if you go to the next slide. These are my parents. That's my dad. That's not me with an old filter, okay? That's people are asking that. I'm like, no, that's just my dad. Why would I Photoshop myself beside my mom? Anyways, that's my mom. She is hitting retirement age, and so I've been trying to convince her to move over to Calgary, but like with this weather, like I have not been successful. She's like, no way. My mom is an extremely compassionate woman, right? To the point where sometimes I actually think it's a little bit irrational. So I remember this one memory. Her and I, we were walking through a store together, right? It's a grocery store-ish, and then she was looking around. It was midday, so everyone's probably working, so there were not many customers. And then what she was saying is, she's like, Tim, I feel so bad for this store. Let's buy something. And I'm like, Mom, it's Walmart. It's like one of the richest corporations out there. Your money makes no difference to them. But that's the kind of person she is. She's compassionate that way. And so I kind of just saw her as irrational. Anyways, different story. In 2012, my brother, he did really well in sales, right? And so his company gave him a full paid-off trip to Cancun for himself and a +1. So thank goodness he doesn't have a lot of friends, so I was just like automatically invited. And during this trip, his company and the all-inclusive resort kept offering things to us. They kept pushing like excursions and activities, massages, and all the food you can ask for. But for the whole trip, for some reason, I just kept tippy-toeing around, rejecting things, saying no, and I just didn't want to be a burden, right? In Vietnamese, it's this word called ngại, but in English, it's something like shyness, or you don't want to be rude, right? Even though there were times where I did want to ask for like an extra trip to the city, or an extra piece of steak or something. When I got home, I realized something, right? The company my brother works for is a multi-billion-dollar company. And they were happy to go out of the way to honor my brother's hard work and just give us whatever we wanted during the trip. And here I was thinking that my tiny little requests were just too much of a burden for his company and to the resort. And then, bam, it hit me. I'm exactly like my mom. Okay, I'm exactly like my mom. I'm irrational. We were both face to face with extremely rich and wealthy entities, and we thought that we were going to be a burden. My mom thought she'd be a burden to Walmart if she didn't buy like extra loaf of bread or something. And I thought I would be a burden to my brother's company if I asked for like an extra piece of steak, right? Even though they were more than happy to give it to me. And so I bring up this irrational fear of being a burden because I think this is actually how we approach God sometimes, right? Think about it. God literally owns everything, right? The trillions and trillions of dollars in money and assets in the world, that's all his, right? And he can give us all that and it wouldn't cost him anything, but he went beyond and he gave us Jesus, which was the most costly sacrifice that he could make. So we know that God is for us, and he is able to give us all things, and yet when we come to him in prayer, what do we ask for? It sounds something like this, right? We're like, God, good and loving creator of the whole universe, you're able to do anything, please give me a new Nintendo Switch. And it's like, no, like think bigger. Okay. Give me good grades. And it's like, no, think bigger, right? And then you're like, okay, give me a house, give me a car, give me a family, give me a partner that loves me, and it's still too small. Think bigger, right? These things are good, but by themselves, they amount to nothing. So they cannot be the main thing that we ask for, the main thing that we desire in our lives. We can go much, much bigger because we know that God is able to give exceedingly more than what we can ask for and what we can imagine. So that's our question today. What is the most you can ask God for? The answer to our question comes from our passage today, which focuses on a prayer. And it's a prayer that Apostle Paul makes while he's just chilling in his favorite hangout spot, prison. And it's one of the most boldest prayers ever prayed. what would you imagine his prayer to look like as he's kneeling there on the cold, hard, like rock floor? Mine would be something like, God, get me out of here. This is humiliating. This is uncomfortable. This is terrible. But Paul actually goes 100 times more extreme than my prayer. And so let's read what he asked God for in Ephesians 3:14-19. For this reason, I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives his name. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. If you had a hard time understanding that, don't worry, I did too. But we're going to go through it together. We'll break it down together. So Paul teaches us from this that the most we can ask God for is power. Specifically, it is the power to welcome Jesus in, and it's the power to understand Jesus' love. And so let's start with our first point. We should ask for the power to welcome Jesus in. So we'll just read through the first part again, and I just highlighted some things I want you to know. And so, for this reason, I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and earth derives his name. I pray out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. This is the first bold request that Paul prays for. His prayer involves the whole Trinity, as you can see, right? That God the Father may send God the Spirit to give power in our inner being, so that God the Son, Jesus, may dwell in our hearts. That's a lot of God in two sentences, right? But it's necessary for Paul. What a bold prayer to call upon all three persons of the Trinity. So let's unpack a few things here. I want to look first at the inner being and the hearts part, okay? The word inner being is quite vague. It comes up in a different book, Corinthians, where it says the outer being is decaying day by day, but we are being renewed in the inner being every day, right? So it's something about the center of us, right? But it can be defined better when we kind of dissect what the word heart is, right? I think when Paul is talking about heart, he's obviously not thinking biology, right? He's not thinking about a four-chambered like cardiovascular muscle, because as cute as it sounds, you can't take a person and like tuck them into your heart, right? He's speaking about something more, right? Every time I read the word heart, I think of a verse from Proverbs which says this: above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Your heart is where everything you do, it flows from it. So I think this is what Paul has in mind when he says heart. He's thinking the control center of our lives, the very core of who we are. May Jesus dwell there. May Jesus dwell in our hearts. May Jesus dwell in our hearts. It sounds a little bit weird, right? If you remember a bit of Bible, you know theology, that sounds really strange to you, because Paul is talking about Christians right now. And Christians actually already have Jesus in their hearts the moment they accept him, right? And so why is he praying that Christ may dwell in our hearts when Christ is already there in our hearts? And so to answer that question, we'll have a really nerdy moment of just drilling down the original Greek language. So this is a new segment with Tim. It's called Geeky Greeky with Tim. Okay. Okay, so the word dwell in its basic form is this word okeo. Okeo. Everyone say okeo. Okay. It means dwell. Okay? It comes from the word oikos. Everyone say oikos? Which means house. Okay? So every time you read the New Testament, you see the word dwell, I want you to think of a house. Okay? So in the Greek language, you can do this thing where you add beginnings or prepositions to the word, and it changes the meaning of the word a little bit. Okay, so for example, you can add the word para, which means beside or near or alongside, and then you add it to okeo, it makes par okeo. Everyone say par okeo. which means dwell beside. In our passage, it's combined with the word kata, which means down or into, right? And so when you have katokeo, it means dwell down, dwell into, but no one speaks like that, right? The proper definition of it is to settle in, to not just be in the house, but to be at home. And it's kind of like this. Last week, it was reading week for post-secondary students, and so some of the boys and I, we went to this low-key, all-you-can-eat Indian buffet, and dude, it was so good, right? It was actually so good. Logan, was it good? Yeah, okay, it was so good. They had like all these different kinds of curries I've never tried. They had like goat curry and bean curry, and they were all so good. They had fresh naan, which is like just the softest thing ever. And on top of that, it was super cheap. Okay, that's my favorite part. For one person, it costs as much as like just like a dish of butter chicken at a normal restaurant, right? And then so that topped with like conversations and time with the boys, that made it the perfect experience for me. What I didn't realize was when I got home, all my clothes smelled like curry. The same way like you go to Korean barbecue and you go home and everything just smells, right? And so I sat on the couch for a little bit, and when I stood up, I think the scent of curry kind of just lingered on my couch, right? And I usually try to wear my pants like at least like 3 times before washing it, and so I folded my pants, I put it in the closet. The next morning, even my closet smelled a little bit like curry, right? And I didn't know this, but the wonderful experience of that restaurant somehow seemed to sneak into all areas of my house. So from my living room, to my kitchen, to my bedroom, even into my closet. And this is low-key such a terrible illustration because I'm comparing Jesus to an odor, but that's what it kind of means to ask Jesus to dwell in our hearts, especially as we imagine the Greek word dwell as a house, right? We don't want him just chilling, waiting at the front entranceway. We don't want him couch surfing as a visitor. No, we want him as a permanent resident. We want him to completely settle in every room of the house. What does that look like? It means that he's the master of the living room where we host people and where we build relationships. He's the head chef of our kitchen where we think about food and nutrition and health. He's in charge of our office where we do our work and where we take care of our finances. Even to be Lord over our closets, our cabinets, every nook and cranny of the house where we try to stuff all our shameful secrets we're hiding from people, right? We want Jesus to be master over all aspects of our lives, not just the ones that we feel comfortable with. And that is one of the biggest asks we can ask of God, because it is only through that where we can truly live life to the maximum abundance of meaning and joy that he intended us to live. Why do we need to pray for power for that? Simply because that level of life change is nothing short of a miracle. So I believe it starts with awareness. If you were being honest with yourself, what areas of your life do you shut Jesus out of? Like, really think about it. What areas of your life do you just like lock the door and don't let Jesus in? Is it your Saturday nights? Is it what you do on your computer? Is it what you search on your phone? Is it the endless hours of scrolling on like Be Real or TikTok or whatever's cool nowadays, right? Or is it refreshing stock prices? Is it your relationships or reputation? Is it the dark, shameful secrets that you think you successfully hidden from everyone? Whatever it is, pray to God that he, in the fullness of the Trinity and the riches of the glory, may give you the power to let Jesus into all areas of your life. And whatever form that power comes as, whether that's community you can trust, or an intellectual mind with new revelations, or just good self-control to apply spiritual disciplines and habits, use it, and use it well to let Jesus in fully so that he can truly be Lord over your life. Our second point is that the most we can ask for is the power to understand the love of Christ. In life, there are moments where you learn something and it completely changes everything about the way you see your world. So I remember one of these moments very clearly. It was during a class in grade 4 science where the teacher got us to go into the computer and went to a website that had this Java program that allowed you to zoom in and out of the universe, okay? And so the first thing we did is we zoomed out. So imagine you just like saw this human, and then zoomed out, you saw a house, then you zoomed out, you saw a city, and then a country, and then the earth, right? And then there's like a lot of dead space, and then you see the solar system. And then more dead space, and then there's like nebulas, galaxies, clusters of galaxies, super clusters of galaxies, until you got to the observable universe. And I was just watching this, I'm just like so mind blown because we are so tiny, right? Earth and everything that happens on Earth is just a molecule compared to the grand scope of everything. And what that did is just made me feel like so small and insignificant. I couldn't believe how much was out there. I was a little bit scared. I'm like, oh, for sure there's aliens. For sure there's aliens, right? But it didn't stop there. You can also zoom in. So zooming in was a little bit different. So it went from human, it zoomed into like, like how big a human hair was, and then it zoomed into like little bug-looking things everywhere, and then it zoomed into like a bunch of like cells, viruses, and then a bunch of like tiny balls of things like, I don't know, like atoms, electrons, quarks, all that stuff. And so it seemed as gigantic as the universe was, equally massive was the microscopic and quantum universe. And zooming in also changed my life a little bit. It just made me feel, I like low-key got like germophobia, because I'm just like, little bugs are just everywhere, like on your face and floors, and it's just everywhere, right? It's kind of gross. I tried to find this Java program so I can show it to you guys, but I think it died. That was like a long time ago. But if you search up on Google, scale of the universe, it's a really cool program that actually shows you, like, you can like zoom in and out of the universe, and it shows everything. It's amazing, right? It's terrifyingly amazing. But you know what's even more mind-blowing than that? And this might be completely wrong. Enoch, you can just rebuke me if it's wrong, but this is how my brain thinks, okay? The universe is God's creation, right? So in a sense, it came out of him, right? But God's love is at the very core of who he is. And so it reasons that the love of Christ is much more vast and deep and grand than anything we have ever seen or we can even imagine. And so this is the second part of Paul's prayer. So let's read it together. I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all of the Lord's people, holy people, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ. And to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. The second bold thing Paul asks for is the power to comprehend the incomprehensible love of Jesus. And it starts with being rooted and established in love. I think it's worth unpacking those two words, rooted and established, right? Because Paul here, he's mixing analogies, okay? So the word rooted, he brings up the image of a tree with deep, strong roots. The word established brings up the image of a building with really strong foundation. That's what God's love does in us. It builds an incredibly strong foundation. Paul is praying that with these strong foundations, you may be strong enough and you may be given the power to overcome the challenge of comprehending the width, the length, the height, and the depth of Jesus' love. Now, there's an issue here, right? What does Paul mean when he asks that we may know of his love that surpasses knowledge, right? How can we possibly understand something that is beyond understanding? And I know that I felt that same way. I'm just like, how is this possible, right? I don't really know the exact answer, but I can give you the two best answers I've come across, both of which apply really well to Christian life. Perhaps Paul sees it as incomprehensible and beyond knowledge because of its vastness, right? And because of its vastness, we have the privilege of spending a lifetime or even an eternity of learning more and diving deeper into Jesus' love for us. We'll never reach the bottom of it. And this idea of forever learning more about God, it excites me. It's something that I look forward to. But another possible reason is that this love is beyond knowledge is because it takes more than just facts and head knowledge to fully grasp it. It requires experiential knowledge. We need to experience the love of God in a way that hits us emotionally, that convicts us spiritually, so that we live through it. Whatever the case is, I think those are really two good reasons. that explain our question, I think that the Christians in the first few centuries were really onto something. They were onto something quite profound. They would read this verse. They would see the adjectives of wide and long and height and deep, the love of Christ, and they would think of the cross. They would think of the 4 points and dimensions of the cross. The cross is wide and long and high and deep, vast enough to cover the entire fallenness and brokenness of all humanity. That gives us both the informational and the experiential knowledge of Jesus' love for us in a way that changes everything about the way we see ourselves and the way that we see life. Just imagine, okay? Just imagine for a second. If we truly understood, even just a little bit, that our Creator, God of the universe, one who is all-powerful, all-loving, He chose to die for us in order to have deep and meaningful relationship with us, how life-changing would that be? We would be able to overcome any insecurity, right? For myself, I wouldn't be tempted to spend all my efforts to try to prove my worth to people or to make people like me or be impressed with me. I would know that Jesus, my most valuable prize and relationship, loves me whether I am a loser in the eyes of the people around me or whether I'm just the most impressive friend or father or pastor or whatever, right? These things don't matter anymore. The love of Jesus would make me so secure despite how people see me or my immediate circumstances. And yet, the reality is, and I and probably most of us still live with fears and insecurities and anxieties. And I think this is why Paul is asking for power to understand this love, right? There are so many things, so many obstacles in our lives preventing us from even coming close to grasping Jesus' love, and we need God to work in our lives to remove obstacles and to heal wounds. What are your obstacles? Perhaps it's trauma. Maybe something happened to you or a loved one that prevents you from having the courage to accept the good news of Jesus. Perhaps it's distractions. There are just a million tempting things that are trying to pull away from your focus, and it takes you away from God, right? Perhaps you want something in this life so badly that you choose to ignore the truth and lordship of Jesus because you know you can't have it both. Perhaps you don't have the full story and you're not convinced. Whatever it is, it starts with asking God for the power to know His love by removing these obstacles and then letting the words of your prayer match the actions of your life. Do something about it. A practical step is to talk about it with someone you trust. Brainstorm what's holding you back. What mindsets are crippling you? What worldviews are stopping you, right? Pray for power in whatever form it may look like. It could look like therapy, community, better sleep, vitamin D, whatever it is, to overcome those obstacles so that you can even begin to know and understand Jesus' deep love for us and move towards a life where we're not crippled by insecurities and uncertainties, but rather we live fully in the abundant love and joy of Jesus. I want to conclude with a reflection on the last part of our passage, because I think it is extremely profound. To combine our 2 points that we made today, when we were able to have Jesus dwell in your heart as Lord over all aspects of your life, and as you grow in your understanding of His love in both theory and experience, you reach the ultimate goal of Paul's prayer that we see at the end of the passage. And it's this here: that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. That you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. This is an incredibly, insanely bold request, and you'll see why. When you hear "to the measure of," what it is saying is that it can only be measured by this, right? So for example, if I'm telling you, yesterday I was walking by our house and I saw the biggest icicle ever hanging from its roof. And you'll ask me, how big was it? And I'd say, it's to the measure of my 2 arms, this big, right? And then you'd be like, okay, I understand how big it is, right? What Paul is asking is that we are filled with something to the point that it can only be measured by all the fullness of God. That's crazy, right? In my head, that's like trying to fit all the oceans in the world inside a little shot glass, right? That's crazy to me. Now, what does Paul imagine we are filled with that can only be measured by all the fullness of God? That's the thing, okay? Only all the fullness of God can be measured by all the fullness of God. Like the same way where only the entire universe can be measured by the entire universe, right? Now, to understand this term a bit better, this phrase of all the fullness of God only happens twice in the Bible, and both of them refer to Jesus. Jesus was filled with all the fullness of God, and so Paul's prayer seems to be saying that as you accept Jesus to dwell in your heart, and as you grow in your understanding of his love, that you may be filled and complete in a way where you have the same relationship with God that Jesus had. That's crazy. That's crazy to me. Now, some of you philosophical thinkers may be worrying, doesn't being filled with all the fullness of God, to the measure of all the fullness of God, make you God, right? And you don't have to worry about that, because imagine you're at the beach and you're filling a bucket with sand. You fill it to the top. The bucket is still a bucket. It's not sand now, right? No. So in the same way, we don't become God, but rather, it's the complete opposite. Just as Adam came to life when God filled him with his breath, when we are filled with the fullness of God, this is when we become truly human. That's when you look most like Jesus, and that's when we are finally all that we're meant to be. And I don't know if you see it, but I think that is just the greatest compliment and the most empowering encouragement that you will ever receive. Because Paul is saying, the only thing that finally fills us, the only thing that finally satisfies us is God himself. What that means is that you're not so small that your whole life is defined by your career or how much money you make. Right? You're not so lame that your entire identity is built on temporary things like school or appearance or game rankings and competitions, right? You're not so pathetic that your life's value is in chasing thrills and experiences that ignite for a night and then fade away the next morning. No, we're made in a way where the only thing that can fill us and satisfy us is God himself in the person of Jesus. Just imagine that. God comes up to you. God, mighty God, creator of the universe, comes up to you, telling you, ask for anything. Anything in the world, he can give it to you. And the most that you can ask for, and the most that he wants you to ask for, is him. For you to be filled to the brim with all of who God is, by letting Jesus in as Lord over all, and knowing his love most deeply as our Savior. He who has God and everything else has no more than he who has God only. That's a quote by C.S. Lewis. I'll just end with that. He who has God and everything else has no more than he who has God only.